Folks, planet Earth is a lot like being on a MASH unit. And happy Veterans Day. In this video, I would like to do not only a tribute to the comedy TV show that MASH was for over 11 years in the 70s through 1983, but I was inspired to do this because not only my love of the show and the fact that it's Veterans Day 2020, but I was thinking about the comedies that have influenced me and my sense of humor over the years. So I'll be talking a little bit about that, as well as how important comedy is for healing in dramatic times, and how the show really, I think, embodied the power of intentional community when very different personalities came together and went through a very stressful ordeal and managed to find a lot of humor in it. And I will probably talk the most about the lead character, Hawkeye, because I think each one of us, as the lead character in our own stage play of life, deserves to appreciate our emotional range and to give ourselves permission to express ourselves appropriately, but not to suppress. And I think that Hawkeye's character embodied that. He was given a lot of latitude when it came to all the sides of his personality that he could express, and I think you'll see that in the slides. So, welcome to the show, everyone, and let's get started. I love this picture of the original cast. And these are some of the other comedy shows that came to mind when I was thinking about what TV shows had probably influenced my sense of humor the most. And in the 90s, it was The Roseanne Show. It really appealed to me because not only are all the characters so likable and so funny, but it was unusual because it was about a low-income family and how they found humor in being low income. At least that's the way I perceived it. And the writing is sharp, and you know what? I grew up with a sofa in the living room that had grandma's knitted Afghan thrown over the back like that. So I don't know. I just got the show, and I think a lot of people did, and it made me laugh a lot. And then in the 80s, my family used to watch a show called Cheers that was on for, I think, about a decade and was very popular. And what all these shows have in common, I think, are, really strong female characters, at least for, the era that they're in. And just all the characters are very funny and very likable. And this one is set in a bar in Boston. So they're very different, but what they all have in common is great writing and great acting. And then in the 60s, the Carol Burnett Show, was another one that was on in our living room a lot. And it was a variety comedy TV show, and this was the core cast, and they were all hilarious. And so they not only did comedy, they did a lot of dance and musical numbers too. So they were very versatile, and all of these people have had, I'm sure, an enormous impact on my own sense of comedy. And I think MASH was really unusual because it found comedy in wartime. So it is set during the Korean War during the early 50s. It's based on a book, a novel, and then it was made into a movie, and then later a TV show. And the TV show really, a lot of the characters and things have, of course, changed from the novel, but the way the characters really came to life and worked together and seemed to have a cohesiveness. It just seemed to really flow, and that's why the show was so popular. So I'm going to be focusing primarily on Hawkeye, the one in the middle. And the show is really about a team of doctors in a MASH unit, which is Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. And so they're all surgeons, except for the chaplain and the lead nurse. And the one on the far left is the clerk. And this is the main character of Hawkeye. And so he is one of the surgeons, and he is probably the funniest character. And he can get away with anything. So there's a lot of conversation over patients in the surgical room scenes. And the thing about Hawkeye is he hates being there. And it's a really stressful environment because they never know when they're going to get wounded, when they're going to hear the choppers, and then they have to drop everything and tend to the wounded and deal with their own PTSD from seeing people wounded from shrapnel and gunfire. And so it was definitely an action show, a drama show, and a comedy show all in one. And it was definitely a show that was easy to get into for all of those reasons, because it blended those things, all of those elements so well. It's a very rare thing. And I really appreciated that, because the show just, it had so many levels to it. And so Hawkeye could go from being, a total professional, he's a doctor, he's a surgeon first, to wearing this red, some people think it's purple, like bathrobe around and a cowboy hat. And he was very outspoken about not wanting to be there and being against the war. And that's where a lot of his humor came from, and he was hilarious. But he could be thoughtful, he could be silly, he was very expressive, he could be angry. They could all get away with being drunk just because they needed to vent from the pressure. And there was a still in their bedroom. This is probably my favorite quote. I brought a book with me to the war, the dictionary. I figure it has every other book in it. I remember hearing that and thinking, God, that's so true. So he was a very literary character, and he was shown, communicating and writing a lot. Sometimes, like writing a letter home, or, and it was like narrated, but, it was a really intellectual show. And a lot of times, when he was writing letters to people, he was really funny because he was complaining and, having that narrated while he was writing it was hysterical. So in one episode, this is Hawkeye and his roommates, and someone had abandoned their Korean baby at their doorstep, and they had to find a home for it. And Hawkeye's relationship with other men, really, really kind of, well, and with all the other characters, but, especially the ones that he was rooming with, I think, defined the show a lot. And so his roommates, changed a little bit over the course of the show, but yeah, the Hawkeye character is the only one that was in absolutely every episode. Which is why I'm focusing on him the most. He was the character that took action, got things done, wasn't afraid to be outspoken or make a fool out of himself. So, and he would take all kinds of risks. So that's him, like, drinking in front of like a colonel or something after they picked him up. He definitely wasn't afraid of a good roast, and I love that about his character, that he could get away with that. He's the master of, like, putting people down, but in a very elegant way. Oh. And he would always, say these things so deadpan. He just had just a certain comedic timing and style, and all these characters did. They were all just hysterical by themselves, and then the writing just, like, brought it out even more so. So there was a lot of camaraderie in the show. This is just a little blurb from one of the scripts, and the actor Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye, did some of the writing. I'm not sure if he did this, but he always delivered things with a lot of dramatic flair. So this was him with his roommate, his best friend, and they laughed a lot together. And I don't know, there's just something about that bathrobe that just kind of says it all about his attitude towards life. And there was a lot of like really deep man talks and stuff that went down in, like, showers and latrines and stuff, but there was never the hint of anything like latent homosexuality or anything like that. They were just supportive of each other. They were supportive men. And so the BJ character was, I thought, kind of portrayed sort of soft-spoken, and just basically kind of, he was married, so he was trying to stay faithful. And he wanted to go home to his wife, and he mostly talked about her. And then the other roommate, towards the end of the show, I think he was a major, Charles Emerson Winchester III. And I liked his character a lot just because he could get away with being a snob, but he um also was not afraid to like go off on people. And he also had a really caring side too, so he was sort of multi-dimensional and well spoken most of the time. So the fearless leader of Colonel Potter, also just a hysterical actor, and then you add the character, and it just worked. So he was a very fatherly figure, and there was another like camp colonel before him, Blake, but I didn't watch the early seasons quite as much, so I'm not really as familiar with those characters. And the one on the left is like a psychotherapist that goes around to the MASH units and other places to basically, help the helpers and heal the healers by being there for them and listening to them and helping them sort out their emotions. So he's a very deep character, a deep well of listening and wisdom. And he wasn't on that many episodes, but when he was, he definitely kind of got my attention because I had not seen anybody with that kind of intensity as far as listening to people and having wise words to offer. And he really helped a lot. So and he also had a great sense of humor. Dr. Sidney. And then the beloved Radar, who was also a clerk, and he was portrayed as someone very kind of innocent and young, and he had a very young sounding voice and a teddy bear, because it helped him with his homesickness. He's a young drafted man. And there was a chaplain character who was also someone that portrayed a good listener, and he had a sense of humor, but he, I think for me, mainly represented the ability to tolerate all faiths. Or, that was his job. I'd never heard of anything like that before, so I didn't know what a chaplain was before this show. And it struck me, I think, that there would be something like that, and like, why wouldn't that be like everybody? I was like, huh. Anyway. Oh, and then, of course, the Klinger character, who was very, very rarely was ever in pants because he was the camp's drag queen. And the joke was that he wanted to get a Section 8, which is basically a ticket out based on, for mental reasons. So he kept trying, and so his outfits would get more and more outrageous the more that he tried to get out of the Army. And it was hilarious to see what he would come up with. And then the colonel, the camp colonel, is who he worked for, and he kind of just ignored it, which was even funnier. So there was a lot of silliness and clowning on the show. And then I almost forgot about this character because he wasn't on the show very often, but when he was probably the funniest, other than maybe Hawkeye, the funniest character, I think, especially for the amount of actual airtime that he had, and that's Colonel Flagg. And so his gag was that he was, he would come into camp and basically announce that he was a spy. And the funny thing about this meme is that that's Hawkeye, not Honeycutt. So he would just sort of like, come in and try to like pull rank and sort of, audit the place and interview people and act like he had, stuff on people. And it was just hilarious. He would just sort of bend reality. So he would tell everyone he was an intelligence officer, but he was like, the stupidest character. And so there was just so much, comedy in that. And nobody liked him because he was just so ridiculous in the things that he would say. So people would just kind of try to humor him. And he had the best lines and the best looks. Oh, a spy that tells you they're a spy. So the cast also had one main female character, and that is Major Margaret Houlihan. And in the early seasons, they referred to her a lot as Hot Lips, and it was, something that over time, she got married and life moved on, but in a way she never really lived it down. But she was an interesting character, and I want to talk quite a bit about her, just because she was pretty much the only female on the show, and she had a big impact, I think, on other women, especially at that time. She was she was a woman in a man's world, and she was a lead nurse. There were other nurses. There were other women there, but they didn't have like major speaking parts, or they weren't really like developed characters. They were mainly there to be. Hawkeye was he was a bachelor, and so part of his shtick was he got to be a womanizer too. So that I'm sure added to the appeal for male viewers that were single at that time, because that's what maybe they want to see. So Houlihan really did have a lot of depth, though. She was a strong woman. She had to be. And she was also the daughter of like a general or something. So she'd grown up in the military and had a great deal of respect for it and for her father. But she had some issues, being there, especially in the beginning. She was dating someone that was married, and his wife was back home, and she was drinking. But there was a bar that was part of the camp, and so there was a lot of drinking going on with everybody. But she could go from maybe an episode where she got drunk to an episode where she was always very professional in the operating room, and then portrayed as very caring by the bedside. And she had to be one of the boys, and she was, and she had a great sense of humor, and I think played with an all-male cast extremely well. And they did let her show quite a bit of emotion. So she did get quite a bit of a range. In one episode, that's her father, came to visit the camp, and she did seem to kind of regress back to, being kind of a 5-year-old who wants approval from daddy, and like her voice changed, and she, started acting a lot more like passive and stuff like that. So it was kind of funny to see that. And so she did have some daddy issues, and this is the married man that she was involved with. And, he was funny, but he I don't know, he was a fool. I never really got him sometimes, but he was just sort of like the comic relief for like everybody else, it seemed like. And then for some reason she liked him. And then eventually he went back to his wife, and so and then she married somebody else, and so that's her with the other cast. I don't know if that guy behind her is the guy she married. I can't remember. Klinger, I think, was the bridesmaid. But anyway, so that sort of, was kind of a turning point in the show when she got married, and I think he was also military, and so they did see each other when they could both get leave and things like that. So that's probably my favorite picture of hot lips. And here's Hawkeye, always shown hitting on the ladies. He definitely was interested, and he kind of used it like the alcohol to sort of make up for his frustration that he didn't want to be there. Yeah, but nobody wanted to be there. I mean, it wasn't like anybody did. He was just more outspoken about it than most. He was a complainer, but he could make it funny. And there was a nurse character. This is Nurse Kelly, who did have some airtime for I think a few seasons, and got to be feisty, and she stood up to the doctor, and that was interesting that they kind of developed another female character a little bit. There was one episode where BJ is tempted to cheat on his wife with a lady who comes to the camp as like a correspondent, and she's writing an article about what it's like to live there and work there on the MASH unit, and so she interviews him, and they get all intimate emotionally and stuff. So a lot of the scenes and a lot of the comedy happened in the mess hall, the way a lot of times when people share meals together, it does. And so the mess hall scenes were often really, really good ones, and they had a lot of meetings together to discuss things as a group. And they put on a lot of shows for each other. They were each other's entertainment, and I think that was another thing that I just loved about the show, is that they showed. I mean, they really became a family, and they they entertained each other, and they also entertained the patients, and like to celebrate. So this was a show that was made starting in the early 70s, based on the Korean War, which is in the 1950s. So a little bit of a time warp. But I think they did really well. The casting, the writing, the acting, it all came together and all of the characters I think, had a following and were just so likable and were just so good together, and that does not happen that often. And so I think the reason I like the Hawkeye character so much is because, like I said, he really got to be himself, and he was also really good at being just not taking anybody very seriously. And if anyone criticized him, he didn't really seem to take that very seriously, and I'd never seen anyone act like that before. He also had a lot of very, I thought, insightful solutions to world problems, and he was a philosopher, really. He had a lot of deep thoughts. As did Dr. Sidney. And, Sidney, he had good boundaries. And he just knew how to put things to sort of just put people in their place when they started to get out of line. And then, of course, there's Klinger. And so I think these are my top 3 characters that have influenced me. And I think Klinger really influenced a whole generation of future cross-dressers, and definitely made me think about the possibilities when it came to, like, what I could wear, what I couldn't wear. He didn't seem to have a filter when it came to clothes, and I thought it was hysterical. And then one day the show came to an end. It was just a show, but it seemed like it was so much more. So I would just like to say that I think we need more comedy in the world, and this has been a tribute to the entire show and the cast and everything that went into the making of it, because I think we need to thank people when they make us laugh. It is such a gift. It is the gift of the sacred clown. They never wanted to be there, and then they finally got to go home in the final episode in 1983. And, I don't think Hawkeye ever saluted. He refused to. He always seemed to have his hands in his pockets. And the final episode was like a 2-hour special, and about half the world watched it. It was one of the most highly watched and highly rated shows, I think, ever. It still has a record. And again, this was, 83 when, people didn't have cable. So everybody just had a big old box in their living room and about 3 or 4 channels. And everybody was kind of watching the same things. And this really penetrated the consciousness of a lot of people who loved the show. And it was very emotional. So those of you that saw it remember And not only because of the goodbyes, but it was very, very much a dramatic ending. And that was, one of the things about the show is that it could get very raw with a lot of its themes and yet still manage to be a comedy somehow. And so they all got to go home. And the ones that were really homesick would put up a signpost when they got there to remind them where they wanted to go back to. And those of us that are here on missions that feel like we are here to raise the vibration, I think often feel like doing that. So when they finally got in the helicopters to leave instead of welcome more wounded, it was very emotional. And it was a very iconic show, and it did influence a lot of people, I think, in a lot of ways. And it really made people think as well as laugh. And honestly, if nothing else, I am just in love with the bathrobe. And the look and just, that attitude towards life that everything about this says to me. The sacred clown. Thanks for the laughs. Goodbye, farewell, amen, and happy Veterans Day, everybody. Peace out.